Pippa.
Welcome, Mel McGrath and Lyn Brown, to the 4 o'clock thing, whatever it is, chatting about books and being in lockdown and crime fiction. And I'm really, really pleased to see Mel McGrath, who I was going to be on a panel with at Killer Women. Sadly, one of the early things to admit, to hoist the white flag and say, look, this doesn't make any sense, we can't do that. And to Lyn Brown, MP, I think, and you're Shadow Minister for Prisons, is that right?
And probation.
And probations. MP for West Ham and a keen crime reader.
I am.
And somebody who's I kept seeing crop up in my Twitter feed talking about crime books, and I thought, oh, I'd quite like to get her on and see what it feels like reading crime books. But first, Mel, that's a terrible thing to have to do, to have to cancel a festival, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really disappointing. We put huge amounts of work into it, and we were so looking forward to seeing all you lovely crime writers. And it's always, and the people who come, it's always so fun and inclusive and chatty and lovely. And we look forward to it every year, but it didn't make sense to go ahead with it. And actually, the day after we cancelled it was the day that the WHO announced a global pandemic. So we were really glad that we'd made that decision. And we were incredibly lucky too, in that our fabulous sponsor, Natixis, allowed us to keep the money. They had given us a sponsorship from their diversity fund because of the mentorship program that we're running to mentor women crime writers from BAME backgrounds, and they allowed us to keep that, and that was great. That was an incredibly generous gesture and allowed us to live to fight another day, so to speak.
But it must feel so weird, because anything like that takes so much planning, and you sort of build up to it, and it was then just like, you must feel completely deflated, because there's still admin to do, there's still all the boring stuff presumably you've got to do, but none of the actual sort of feedback and saying that was brilliant.
Yeah, actually my house is absolutely full of books and samples and proofs, because all the publishers sent them in and then they closed down. There's nowhere to send them back to. So I've got kind of 200 copies of various forthcoming. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to read all of them, but I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, that could be great. It could be quite difficult to get around the flat when you're isolating. Lyn, thanks so much for joining us. You're obviously, your life will have changed massively. You're not going to the Palace of Westminster much at the moment.
No, I'm in total lockdown, and sadly I've been told that I should be doing this for the next 3 months because of medication I'm on.
Right.
So the internet, chatting to people by Zoom has become an everyday thing for me. And I'm actually quite, in some ways, it's helping with the organisation of time rather well, which I found weird. But I'm hating it, in truth. I just want to get out.
I bet you do. I bet you do. It must be really hard. But are you missing anything about going to Westminster, or is
tea room mostly? Right. I miss the tea room. It's where I meet all my colleagues, and it's where we catch up with each other on chat. It's the place you go for support. It's the place you go for a laugh. It's the place you go for a real moan. And there is always someone in the tea room that you want to sit next to, pick their brains, find out if they've got any gossip. Or just to moan to, and they'll find you a way through something you're finding quite difficult. The tea room, I miss the tea room. So we're having virtual tea rooms. Well, actually gin and tea rather than tea.
Yeah, you have to make your own tea. I found it quite, it's...
Gin, we don't mind that. But yeah, it's the gin. It's the gin. I must admit it's gin. Gin o'clock.
Yeah.
Gin with Gwyn.
Oh. But anyway, you're a member of this House of Commons Labour Women's book group. How did that come about?
I read a lot, and in the tea room, I was finding other friends on the Labour side who also read a lot. We were swapping titles, giving each other recommendations, and I thought, do you know what? It's time. And so I set one up. It must have been about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and we have had a blast. It is one of the best nights of the month. We sit there, anything from between 6 to 16, 20 of us, and we drink wine, we eat cheese, and we talk about a selected book. We've even been doing it on since we've been locked down. Vaseem Khan was kind enough to join us remotely. Aisha Malik has joined us remotely. And this week we've got another remote book club, but the author isn't joining us. We're reading The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard. We wanted something light and fun.
I was going to say,
we've been meaning. Sorry, I'll shut up in a minute. We've been meaning to do Pat Barker for a couple of months, and every time I get round to, so let's do Pat Barker, or let's do Margaret Atwood, and I get no, something light, and so we are now on The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard.
I can see why. I mean, but how? I mean, it must be. I just love the idea of being a fly on the wall when MPs are choosing what book to read. Do you know what I mean? It's not enough in a normal book group. There's a whole lot of MPs there, with each with, presumably you want to kind of be how do you stop being show-offy about social agendas and things like that? Because presumably reading for pleasure is part of it.
No, we don't do because we know each other so well. You don't have to do that. Right. So we've got one of us who just loves dystopia. I love crime. There's a couple of them that read a lot of women's fiction, just women's fiction, full stop. And so we know how to negotiate without upsetting each other, which is half of the course, I think. I chose The Warden. I tried to get them to read some Trollope. And I suggested this at the end of one of our web things. Let's do some Trollope. Let's look at The Warden. It's a brilliant book. And I got back silence. And okay, then. And I thought, well, that's not going to wait. That's not going to work. So I then did a message round to the WhatsApp group saying, Aisha Malik, fancy that? Yeah, it's a lovely middle-class Asian Muslim meets the Archers. How about something like that? Wow, we loved it. And she was amazing. And she came on. And seriously, one of my best reads. Green and Pleasant Land, one of my best reads of the year.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll take that as a tip. I'd just like to say hello to a few people because there's people coming who tend to pop every day. Hello, Pippa, who also got hello there from Lynn. Hello, Keith. Hi, Andy, Timaeus, Sven from Germany, Keith, Caroline, Barry, Susan. I think that'll probably do me for now. And Domenica De Rosa, otherwise known as Ellie Griffiths. Have you ever read any Ellie Griffiths?
We love Ellie Griffiths.
There you go.
What's not for like?
There you go.
You can do everything.
If I could get Ellie Griffiths to one of my book clubs, I know that I would never ever lose the chairship of it.
I think she's going to be there. I think we'll see that. Hi, Will Dean, another author.
Hello, Will.
So how's it with you then, Mel? I mean, you have a book coming out next year now, I think. That hasn't got pushed back because of COVID, has it? That's just got pushed back because presumably that's what happens with books.
Yeah, I'm just bloody lazy. That's why it's got pushed back.
You're not. You're the least lazy person in the world.
Here it is, in the middle of its. Don't know if you can see it. In the middle of its second edit, and yeah, it's called Two Wrongs. It's about a woman who is keeping a terrible secret from her adopted daughter, and is faced with the dilemma of not telling her might risk her life and telling her might kill her. And all that against a background of suicides on campus in a UK university.
Ooh. Oh, very good. Right. I mean, I did when I sort of blurbed you for this, I kind of said you have someone or other who's quite good at spiking the kind of morality or current morality. You do kind of look for themes when you're writing this sort of new series of books, don't you? Is that a deliberate thing, or does that just come because that's the kind of person you are? I ran out of breath saying that. You are.
You did. I'm just really interested in, I'm really, I think the whole crime genre is about what is good and what is bad, what is evil, the nature of good and evil, and everything that pertains to that, like justice and, whether justice and the law are the same thing, and how people make decisions about something that often is between doing something easy that's morally dodgy, or taking the high road. And so it's crime is all about testing people's mettle, really, crime fiction, I think. And readers get to do that when they're for themselves. They get to put themselves in those positions. So I like those kind of moral dilemmas where no one comes out. There's no obvious baddie. There's no obvious goodie. No one comes out, squeaky clean. But even the baddies, you get to understand why they've done what they've done. And I think that's, that comes from all kinds of things. I'm halfway through training as a psychotherapist, so I have a real interest in why people do stuff and understanding why people do stuff. I've worked in prisons, so I know that, people can make a wrong decision in an instant and spend the rest of their lives regretting it, and how easy it is actually to do that. We have this kind of sort of prevailing wisdom about people in prisons that they're set up to fail, and that from day one they didn't have a choice. They're from deprived backgrounds, and some of that there's elements of that are true, but there's also you meet people every day in prisons who just freaked out, saw red, made a bad decision one time. And those people are really interesting to me, the people who make a bad decision one time.
And then carry it for the rest of their lives. Yeah. You've also written a lot of non-fiction as well, and right at the beginning, like, I think you wrote Silvertown. You've written a lot about the East End of London and about that sort of thing. You wrote Silvertown. Now, Lyn, that's your manor, isn't it? That's where you started.
Where I was born, grew up, and lived until my early 20s.
Right.
In Silvertown. Mum worked in Tates's, which, as you'll know, is the Silvertown part of Tate and Lyle's, not the West Silvertown part of Tate and Lyle's. That's how I got into politics, was fighting the city airport for my mum, because she didn't want those planes coming through her bedroom window.
Oh, right. There's a lot to say about City Airport. That's
there certainly is.
I was certainly around and active in Silvertown at the time when there were all kinds of promises about City Airport that didn't come off locally.
Didn't come off. And that's what got me into politics, was sitting at a public inquiry, which I didn't want to go to, a public meeting I didn't want to go to. And I had made up my mind, because I knew it all. I was 22, just back from university. And I knew that this airport would be so much better for the East End than anything else. Right. And then my mother said, yeah, whatever, but I want to go to this public meeting. I want you to come with me. I went along to this public meeting, and I realised that these men in suits were lying to the people that I grew up with. Yeah. And that was me done. Right. I attended the public meeting, the public inquiry, took petitions door to door, and then got involved locally politically to try and stop it.
Have you come from a political background yourself then? Was it a political family particularly?
Mum was a shop steward at Tates's. My grandfather fought the fascists in the 1930s, but they're not household names. They're my family that just did what they thought was right. And my dad was very political in lots of ways, joined the Labour Party late to support me. But yeah, I suppose they're just normal people, come from a normal family in the East End of London.
Which is what you've been writing about a lot of the time, family from your own background and stuff like that, isn't it, Mel? I mean, that's a bit of this. You enjoy finding the stories that kind of describe those neighbourhoods, don't you?
Yeah, my non-fiction. Yeah, I write a lot about, I've written 2 books of social history, 3 books of social history.
Three. Hopping as well.
We blend into one after a while. Silvertown, Hopping, and Pie and Mash was the latest one. And so, I mean, it's partly about discovering that I can trace my family history back 300 years to the City of London as was and the East End. And it's partly about rediscovering that history, that's a history of ordinary people that's actually been kind of not written about very much at all, and on the ground kind of obliterated. by courtesy of first the Luftwaffe and then the London Docklands Development Corporation.
Absolutely.
We made all kinds of very political decisions, actually, that they had huge powers, and they sort of turned the docks into docklands. And so one of the decisions was to keep all the Victorian buildings, which are now, or Georgian buildings, in places like Wapping, which are now kind of £2 million luxury flats, and just raise everything else because it wasn't decorative in their terms. And as a consequence, it kind of creates sort of ghettos in Docklands that, there are so many cinnamon wharfs in Docklands, you wouldn't believe it. The only thing that Britain ever imported was cinnamon. There's very kind of sheep's head. It's all been. I accept that London's always been an incredibly dynamic city. That's what makes its history so interesting. That's what makes it a fabulous place to live. So I'm not one for saying everything should be set in aspic and the good old days were the good old days. The story I often talk about is, in my grandmother's time, on their street there was one guy who was responsible for keeping the black suit that all the other men borrowed, and that was necessary because there were still so many children dying. So there was solidarity, there was a lot of neighbourhood spirit, but in the context of people having absolutely nothing and people's children dying of diphtheria and the kinds of things that we wouldn't even imagine kids to be dying of now in this country.
Well, it's a very complex part of town, and you represent Newham, don't you? And Newham has really been hammered again because the fact is that it's one of the poorer boroughs, and poorer boroughs have a hard time at times like this, don't they?
They certainly do, and Newham has the highest death rate from COVID for all kinds of reasons, I think. But there's no doubt about it that the community I represent, many of them are struggling. But at the same time, they pull together still in its current beautiful difference than it was 30 years ago. There's a food bank which is massively supported. There's a project called Magpies in Forest Gate, which is for people who have no recourse to public funds. It's loved by our local football club, Clapton FC. With the mosques, the churches, there is a vibrance of assistance and help and mutual aid out there, which is a testimony to a good community anywhere. But the truth is that the community is struggling and does.
Yeah. You've got a top bookshop there that's been going for ages, haven't you?
Newham Bookshop, you're right. Vivian would kill me if I didn't give it a plug. But Newham Bookshop. First went to see Viv back in my 20s for my mum and the latest Catherine Cookson hardback for Mother's Day, and was delighted amongst all these political tomes. She had a copy, which saves my bacon, of a hardback of Catherine Cookson at the time. She's brilliant, and they are much more than the bookshop. And she epitomises, the community spirit that is in East London, in Newham.
Yeah, she's astonishing, Viv. She's a proper old school bookseller. She's why we have to support indie bookshops. Viv is the embodiment of that. She's incredibly responsive to her local community. She'll carry whatever the community wants, but she also pushes the boundaries and suggests things. And sorry, that's my screen going crazy. And she has so much energy. She's formidable. She turns up at every event. She's a wonderful presence in the East End. She's she'd be a great loss if she weren't there, and the bookshop weren't there, and her colleagues.
Well, it's my one.
They're books by bicycle at the moment, but around the streets of Newham. So it just goes. It really is a brilliant place.
you know, so many independent, and I've been speaking to a lot of independent booksellers as part of this. So many of them are doing that. And actually, this is the thing. It was great the other day that that was abolished on ebooks. But actually, we really, really, really need now to look at how we keep independent bookshops going. Because if we're going to rebuild the high street, they've been doing the things the high street need to be doing for decades now. And it is about community. It's not just selling stuff. A bookshop is much more than a place that sells stuff, especially when they're run by people like that. But that's my political thing here. But I just think somebody needs to think about that, because they've got the perfect model of what we need to find for businesses that go in the bookshop. Yeah. Now, what was I going to say? The Guilty Party, which is your book out now, Mel.
Yeah.
Now, that really fascinated me, because it's about a bunch of people who've just refused to grow up, of which I feel for my generation there's so many. Those people who they're still raving, and you think you really shouldn't be. And there's something really about those people. But also in your book, you're also going, oh, stop it, just stop it, go home, go to bed early. Is this from personal experience, Mel?
My lips are sealed. Yeah, I mean, I had quite a rackety time in my 30s, which was, you know, a couple of years ago, obviously. What the genesis of the Guilty Party really was about that thing that we all have living in cities. I mean, most of the time I'm in Hackney, of walking by something that looks a bit off.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thinking, should I intervene? What's going on there? Do I want to get involved? What will happen to me if I do get involved? Isn't it just easier to walk on? And of course it is easier to walk on, but there is a price to pay for doing that. Yeah. So I really wanted to explore that. And the Guilty Party explores that through 4 friends who witnessed something at a rave that is most definitely off. Yeah. And decide not to do anything about it, and then meet up again a month later for a weekend away, and at which point the proverbial S1H2 fan.
Yeah, no, it's a very clever book. It's very clever, and it gets that sort of sense of it. Because I mean, that's something as well. I know that happened to you. You saw a horrible incident out from your house and actually, the moment you report it, you also are involved. You get involved in quite complex ways, don't you?
Really complex ways, yes. So I witnessed an attempted murder in my street, and my first thought, obviously, was to call the police, which I did. And it was right in the middle of the assault that I called the police. And I remember the policeman saying to me, there was the most terrible screaming. And the policeman saying to me, is that the assault? And me saying, what the hell do you think it is? Of course, that's the assault. And then immediately you become wrapped up in, you know, I'm down at the Holborn police station, the serious crime unit. I become a witness, then I become a vulnerable witness because it's a gang killing or attempted killing. You're wrapped up in the court system. You have to make all sorts of applications to judges to give testimony from behind a screen. Little things like going to, well, maybe it's not a little thing, but I remember going to Southwark Crown Court where it was to be tried for a look around, and the usher took me around and she showed me where the witness stands, and she said, you do understand, don't you, that the defence barrister will do everything he can to make your testimony look as though it has no credibility.
Substance, yeah.
I remember thinking, well, I haven't done anything. I've done my duty as a citizen, and actually, I've been very traumatized by what I saw. I was incredibly traumatized by what I saw. I didn't even realize it at the time, how traumatic it is to be a witness to a violent event, and it stays with you. It never leaves you, and that the energy that comes. You know, there's a split second where you think this isn't happening, it's not real. And then there's an energy that comes with it. It's almost like the wind coming before the tornado. And you think, yes, it is, that it's unmistakable. And it had all kinds of impacts because it was a local person who was the victim. It had all kinds of impacts on the street, on the community, on who came forward to give testimony and who didn't. It was a traumatic event, but it was incredibly interesting. And it probably took up about 2 years of my life, one way or another.
Yeah. A couple of quick things. Alex wants to ask you, what's more enjoyable to write, fiction or non-fiction?
Well, fiction is such an adventure because you've never going, and so it's like setting out on a expedition to the pole, and you think you're equipped, but you're never equipped. Really, it's always there's always something coming along to surprise you or test you. And non-fiction is a very different process, but it has all kinds of. I tend to write non-fiction about the people and communities that are not much written about,
right.
And particularly in East London. I've also written about communities in the Arctic, for example, and I get a great satisfaction about representing ordinary lives often in difficult situations that are resilient and full of life and full of colour. And when you get a letter, as I do, my latest Pie and Mash was about Bethnal Green and Bow, seen through as if seen through the window of Kelly's Pie and Mash shop, which those of you who live in East London might know, over about a century. And I had so many letters from people who were generous enough to give me their stories or their family stories after that book was published, saying, you've told my family story in a way that means that it will never get lost. It'll always be there in the shelves of a library. And even someone whose family were Italian origin and they changed their name during the Second World War for obvious reasons, because they were, the enemy. And he said, I'm so proud of what I now know about my grandfather that I'm going to change my name back to its Italian name. So
we've Barry said he's American. He visits the London Times. He's convinced he's going to buy the books now, so next time he comes to London, he can look around that way. And Sven was saying how much he's missing London, especially the theatre. He's living in Hamburg. But also, so come back to London when you can, people. Was your family avid readers then, Lyn? Is that where you got your love of books from? Where did it all come from?
My mum wanted to make sure that I never went and worked at Tate and Lyle. Right. And it was her aspiration for me, was that I didn't stack boxes like she did. So she had a really hands-on approach to my education, and she bought me 70 Enid Blyton books that are currently in my loft, because at that point we didn't have the Noon Bookshop, and the local library around the corner wasn't that much cop. Right. And we didn't therefore know how to take my reading on. But my love of books did come from Mum. Mum read loads. And when I went off to college to do a degree that was part in literature, I brought home books for her, which she shared around the icing sugar packing floor. So George Gissing, New Grub Street and the Netherworld was something that she was really excited to discover. She would have loved The Warden. I don't think she ever read any of the Barchester Tales things, but I know she'd have loved that. She read Dickens because it was a good story, and she, so Mum did read. She wouldn't, but Mum never thought of herself as being clever, intelligent. She was always the daft one, the dim one of the family, blah 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 blah. Yeah. Whereas she wasn't, and she really wasn't. And everything that I am, I've managed to achieve. Anything I've managed to do is at her door, and I'm very grateful to her.
Indeed. And are you reading much now? Are you finding? I mean, it's a bit of a funny time, isn't it? I think everybody's trying to work out what they can get through. Writing can be quite hard, but is reading? Are you going to certain stuff for reading?
So I'm a CWA judge again this year. And so this is my first year doing it since, I think it was 2007, where I did 3 years, 5, 6 and 7. And so I have to keep it up, otherwise Pippa will be at my back. And I think I do, on average, about 2 books a week. When I'm on holiday, I read a book a day, and I save books for my holiday as well. So ones I know that I'm really going to enjoy, or I think I really want to read, they get taken away, and are one of the 14 books that finds themselves in the case for the 2 weeks in Italy around a swimming pool. And I literally read a book a day. It's my way of...
Thank heavens for people who read a book a day, eh, Mel? We need...
Read 2 books a day, please.
How's your reading going, Mel? Are you managing to get through stuff or in the middle of the book and therefore can't read much?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm reading in a sec, but I want to add to Lyn's story about how important family is in cultivating reading habits in kids. I mean, my parents were EastEnders. My mum was the daughter of her parents ran a cafe in Silvertown for the Tate Lyle workers and for the dockers, and she was discouraged from reading very much. But what saved her, strangely, were 2 things. Firstly, she was evacuated in the war, and she was evacuated to a household that had books. And when she came back, put to work in the cafe at the age of 11, she got tuberculosis. And she spent 5 years in a TB sanatorium in Wanstead, and there was nothing to do but read. There was sort of very rudimentary, this was in the 40s, there was very rudimentary teaching, but really she was left to her own devices. And her love of books came from that. And although growing up, in my early childhood, my parents didn't have any money, but we would go to I'm one of 4, and we would go to the library every single Thursday without fail, and come back with a wheelbarrow full of books. And I think in a way, my books saved my mum's life in all kinds of ways, and sort of literally and metaphorically, and got her through those really, really dark 5 years of being sat out on a balcony and being put in iron lungs and all of that stuff. And but also got her out of the very limited horizons that her parents had for her, and enabled her to see another world, that another world was possible. And I'm forever grateful that she gave me that love of books, because they, on so many occasions, they've saved me too. So that I'm going to get off my soapbox about books.
Oh, right, it's absolutely right, and I think it does. It's that thing about sometimes you wish that children could be a bit more bored, because you need that place sometimes to just go into your head and define those worlds and how much they can give back to you. But children are still reading, so that's all right.
But as far as reading's concerned, something I knew that would be the perfect lockdown book, because I knew that we would be likely to be in this situation for some time. So,
wow, one of my summer books,
and I hope you can see it's the independent book version.
Very good.
And so I spend every evening about 8:30. I say to my partner, I've now got an assignation with Henry VIII. Excuse me. And I go up and I spend my time reading about the madman that Henry VIII was.
Yeah, because I mean, I know you're a CJ Sanson fan as well.
Me too, massive.
Yeah, and well, he lives up the road from me. He's doing all right. I speak to him every now and again. But anyway, I one question before you go, because I say half an hour of your time, and I've taken up at least that. But and this is, do you think that the Commons is going to change because of this? Are you going to do, wouldn't it? I just love the idea that you can actually get through more business if you're not in a chamber shouting at each other. Is there that possibility appearing from this kind of stuff?
Well, I don't want to see the change to the voting system. When we was in government between 2005 and 10, it would often be the only place I would be able to find ministers who spent their life hiding from me. And when we voted, I would stand at that door and wait for them to come through and then walk with them whilst they voted, whilst I put my case. If you don't get the opportunity to lobby in the lobby, it's a tool out of your box, which you can't do without. So for me, the chamber is important because I think it's important to be able to defend the position you have and do it robustly, and to know that there's confidence. You can tell so much from a politician too who's in the chamber. You can tell whether they believe it when they're on their foot, whether they're just coming out with stuff because they have to. For me, the chamber is a leveler in many ways, because the one thing that I think you can get from the chamber is to know whether or not somebody's just pulling your leg, whether they believe it, whether they're authentic, whether this is a genuine argument, whether this is an argument they've been encouraged to put forward. So I know it's terrifying. I find it terrifying there every day. I'd like to continue the chamber, maybe less combative than it has been, but the lobby always, I think the lobby needs to be there, especially for those people who, would hide otherwise. And trust me, there were ministers who would hide.
That's a really interesting answer. That's a good insight. Thank you very, 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 very much, Mel and Lyn, for coming by this afternoon.
Thank you. It's
been an absolute pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
And hopefully see you both in the flesh at some point in the future when we're allowed to again.
Great.
Love it. Take care. Bye then.
Right, I'll press the end button.